Alright, so today we'll be looking at the open-ended question for your topical practice on respiration. Okay? So Elijah set up the experiment as shown. He took a deep breath and started blowing out as much air as he could in the bottle through a long plastic tube, which is this part over here. Now, what will happen to the water level in the bottle after some time? So I don't think you can see very clearly, but the bottle level is somewhere near to the top already. It's nearly filled up to the brim. So what would happen over here would be that as your bubbles start to enter, these bubbles will eventually float to the top. And the important key things here, please note this down if you have not. We need to understand that air occupies space. So because air occupies space, your bubbles will eventually end up occupying the space at the top. Therefore, your water level would now decrease. So therefore, the answer would be the water level will drop or fall or decrease, any one of it. Okay? Next, at the end of the experiment, the volume of water left in the bottle is 500 ml. Based on the experiment, how much air can Elijah's lungs hold? So let me clear this whole thing. So we have a fresh canvas to start on. So we assume that when it's first started up, the water is filled right to the brim, all the way, 100%. So what happens is that they tell you at the end of it, okay, about this much here, alright, which is 500 ml of water, is actually left at the back. So since we know that at the start, the water was filled to the brim, whatever amount of air later on, okay, let me change the color, that occupies this space actually belongs to the amount of air that is blown out from Elijah, which is equivalent to his lung capacity. Okay, so this amount actually came from his lungs, this amount of air. So how do we do the math? Very simple. So the total capacity that we know is 1500 ml. So we can take 1500 ml minus away the remaining water. So that will give us a total of 1000 ml. Now be very careful of your units, because your units is essential, is part of the requirement. When you go up to secondary school, it's the same thing. Units are especially important. Now the units, you can use ml or you can use cm cube. They are both fine. Okay, in measurement units for science, we can use this for items that flow, substances that flow, such as gases or your liquids. Now then, after that, the next question. Alan set up the apparatus as shown below. When air is sucked out of tube A, the balloon will what? Because of what? Now we have done this before in our workbook, but we haven't exactly gotten down to translating our understanding into an explanation in words. So what would happen? First things first. So we have to understand the main principle. Okay, we know that the balloon will inflate, but why? So once again, the key idea here is air occupies space. So if air occupies space and you are essentially sucking out the air, what happens is that there is a void. You are actually so-called creating an empty space, literally an empty space. Now I just want to be clear that a lot of time when we say space, right, When we say, oh, there's some more space in the luggage, there's some empty space in the luggage, is it really empty? The answer is actually no. It's actually air spaces, right? But in this case, we are really talking about empty space, whereby the air is being sucked up. So we can assume that a portion of it, okay, of the air has been sucked out, and there is some extra empty space here that needs to be filled up with something, right? So in this case, your air from the outside will actually enter your balloon, whereby your balloon would then inflate, okay, become bigger. This is actually to take up the space that was previously occupied by your air that has been sucked up. So all these points that I say needs to be included into your answer. So let's see how is that being translated into words. Please copy down all annotations. It's very important because as you annotate, it helps you build a better understanding. Alright, because practice makes habitual. Alright, so answer here it will be to inflate. Sorry, let me just change my pen. Okay. It will actually inflate. Why? So remember the first few points. So as air is being sucked out, the first thing we notice would be there is less air in the glass jar. Okay. Then after that, because there is less air in the glass jar, what will happen would be air from the surrounding will rush or will enter or will go into the balloon. So be very careful, it's not into the glass jar but into the balloon, okay, through tube B, inflating it. To occupy. I will change a different color to show you that this is another key point. The empty space in the jar. Okay, so this empty space was actually the space that was previously occupied by the air that was sucked up. Alright, so that's why it is empty. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a while for you to process these words. Alright, moving on. Okay, next question. The diagram below shows a magnifying part of a human lung. So in an exam, okay, this is topical practice paper on respiration. So it is very apparent and only logical that all the questions are related to the topic of respiration. So basically, if let's just say you look at this, the part that it's mentioned the word lungs would actually signal to you that it's respiratory system. Okay, so then all this part about respiratory system should come right flooding back in information. Okay, things like are they testing on different parts, identification of different parts? Okay, are they testing on what is required for the process of respiration? Should really just come in naturally. Okay. So, one important thing to take note of is for respiratory system, you have to memorize the function of the various parts. And one of the key parts that you have to know would be your air sacs, which they have labeled here. Okay? Now, so this part over here, this vein-like structure, these are actually your blood vessels. Now, more correctly, these are called your capillaries. Okay, now I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to take this opportunity to actually revise with you how does your air sacs work in a very general sense, so you get an idea. Now I'm going to actually enlarge one of it. I'm just going to take one out and I'm going to enlarge it. Now I'm going to draw this structure in black so that we can see it properly. Now imagine I take one of this structure and I cut it, okay, so that you can see the cross section of it. Okay, now I'm going to add in now in red color your blood vessel. This is actually your capillary. This is magnified many times. Okay, so this tube over here that you see, this whole tube is actually your capillary. So I'm going to label that for you. And the one that is in black would be your air sac. Okay, now what happens here is that in your capillary, alright, the direction of flow is this way. It's a one-directional flow. So what gets carried inside would be your red blood cells, which I'm going to draw in now. So please feel free to follow my drawing if it usually will help you. Okay, now this is the part that I'm going to change the color. Sorry, okay, my apology. If I want to change color, it should be the other way around. Let me just get this color right. Okay, and the direction of flow is like this. This part and this part. So from here, whatever is entering over here actually comes from your heart. So I'm going to draw a heart here to represent. Okay, and this is also going back to your heart. Alright? Now, the blood these round circular parts that I've drawn in, these are your red blood cells. Yes, I've colored it blue at this area here, but no, the actual color of your red blood cells are red. They are never blue. It's just that when they are deoxygenated, they actually in real life look dark purple, a very dull red, okay, a very deep red, okay, not bright red, but that is deoxygenated blood, blood that is poor in oxygen. Okay, so what's over here would be oxygen poor blood. So I'm going to use blue. Okay, and the one in red this side will be oxygen rich blood. Now, this is the part that is very important because it also helps in your understanding of circulatory system. Alright? Now, when your blood enters from here, what happens is that it first enters as deoxygenated blood, oxygen poor blood. Why? Because it comes from the heart, whereby the heart has received blood coming from all other parts of your body. Your hands, your legs, your kidney, your lungs, your brains. All goes back to the heart, deoxygenated. Why? Because your heart, your lungs, everybody will have taken it and used it up for respiration. Okay, so it is very rich in carbon dioxide, but very poor in oxygen. So as it travels, okay, what actually happens is this. Your carbon dioxide will go back into CO2 stands for carbon dioxide, go back into your air sacs, whereas your oxygen, O2, goes back into your red blood cells. Okay, and therefore that's why as you go in this direction, your blood gets reoxygenated. It then goes back to your heart, which pumps it to all other parts of your body for respiration to occur in every single cell. Now, you have to realize one thing. Do you realize that I drew my arrow for carbon dioxide coming out from an empty space, whereas I drew my oxygen going into a red blood cell? Now, this is something that a lot of students don't understand, and when they reach secondary school, they are very confused because the teachers always tell them blood, blood, blood. And they assume that your carbon dioxide also gets carried by your oxygen. No. Your carbon dioxide is in the blood itself, but it's never carried by your red blood cells. Only the oxygen binds to your red blood cell. The carbon dioxide is just dissolved in your blood. How so? Remember, I told you blood is like Milo. It's a mixture. You've got Milo powder, water, milk, sugar inside your Milo. Same thing like blood. Carbon dioxide just get dissolved in the water component, okay, known as your plasma, the liquid part of it. So back to here. So they ask you, why are there many tiny air sacs in the lungs which are surrounded by blood vessels? Okay, so the key word here is many. Alright, so we know that the function of your air sacs, which are covered by blood vessels, is for gaseous exchange, right? So therefore, how does it help? It increases surface area so that more exchange of gases can happen, or more absorption of oxygen can happen. Okay, now so I'm going to pen this down. Okay, so it is basically to increase the surface area for faster gaseous exchange. Okay, between the air sacs and the blood in the capillary or in the blood vessel. Okay? Alright? Can? Okay. Next, Debbie, okay, this other question is a question that wasn't done very well, so I'm going to spend a little more time on this. Debbie is having an asthma attack, is unable to breathe well. Okay? His doctor tells him that his windpipe and air tubes are swollen. How does swelling affect his breathing? So to understand this, let's go back to this diagram to help us. So this is your windpipe over here. Okay? You imagine now that your windpipe is swollen. So at first, let's just say your windpipe is of this thickness. Okay? This is your windpipe over here. Now, when you get asthma, what actually happens is that instead of being this thick, your windpipe is now this thick. So what happens to the passageway over here? It actually becomes narrower, right? It actually becomes narrow. Okay, it has narrowed down. So when it narrows down, ask yourself, what is the purpose of a windpipe? The function of the windpipe is to basically carry your air, okay, from this point to your lungs, right? So when it becomes narrower, you realize that its function gets affected in the sense whereby air, not just oxygen. The problem here is a lot of you just wrote oxygen. Conceptually, that's wrong, because there is no filter in this area to say, okay, I'm going to filter out. It is only going to be oxygen that flows in. In fact, it's just air, right? Air. So in general, your airflow will be restricted, okay? And hence, what happens? Less air will actually go in, okay? So what would happen is this. You need to tell me that, firstly, we talked about narrowing, right? Okay, so you have to say that the swelling narrows his windpipe Now, then after that, you're going to tell me, so if it narrows windpipe, what happened? Therefore, what? Decreasing the amount of air entering his lungs. Correct? So now, then after that, we talk about breathing here. That was the main question. So you need to talk about rate of breathing, right? Hence, Davy, what? Breathing rate, Davy's breathing rate will increase. He breathes faster, in out faster, to increase the amount of oxygen intake. Only then does it make sense. Think about it. Okay? So, first explain structurally what happens. Relate to the function. Windpipe gets swollen, narrows the passageway. Less air can enter. Not less oxygen, less air. So because less air also means less oxygen, how does his body compensate? Okay, his body compensates by breathing faster. Okay, in an attempt to get more oxygen because he needs the oxygen to survive. Alright, because oxygen is needed for respiration. So you realize that the notion of oxygen being needed for respiration is very repetitive because that's the whole key idea actually behind respiration. Alright? Okay? Okay, I'm going to pause here for a minute for you all to digest this. Okay, moving on. Okay, Ahmad built a model of a human respiratory system as shown in the diagram below. Now, whenever you have a model, right, it's just a representation of your respiratory system. It is never the same, or it can never be 100% accurate. Okay? Now, Ahmad's teacher told him that balloons will not inflate when the rubber sheet is being pulled down. What should he do to correct his model? So I know a lot of you said something like to cover the top part here. This is correct. Okay? So this is actually pretty straightforward. Now, however, okay, I want to challenge you to go one step further. If you just say, seal up the top, cover the top, I will accept the answer, sure, for this time. However, I would like to push you one step further. Don't just say seal up the top. Tell me what he needs to do. So you can say put a stopper. Okay? Don't know what's a stopper? Never mind. Plasticine also can. And then why do you do it? To seal up the opening of the bottle. Now be very careful. The opening of the bottle is here. This is correct. Not opening of the straw. Opening of the straw is here. This is wrong. This is correct. Okay? Which organ does the rubber sheet represent? Okay, so it represents the diaphragm. So a lot of you could not spell diaphragm, so please take note of your spelling. Okay, this is another question that everybody did not do all that well. Okay, so let's take a look let's dissect this question a bit. Okay, now a group of people is trapped in the lift. The lift has no opening. Okay, group of people. And the fan has stopped working. After a few hours, the people in the lift started to faint. Explain why this happened. So you always need to annotate, because it is very important. So let's digest this. What are some of the key ideas to help us? Start to faint. Now, why would you start to faint? Okay, think about it. People usually faint due to a lack of energy, right? So no energy, lack of energy. Because remember I told you this, you need activity to do things. So obviously when you have a lack of energy, your muscles stop working, your brain stop working, you will lose conscious. Okay? No opening tell you that, okay, basically the air composition cannot change. Okay? No air enters or leave. Okay? And then a group of people tells you that there are many people. So then you start to form in your mind, I know there's a lack of energy. I know no air enter and leave. How does that then cause my people to faint? So I can do reverse engineering. Okay? So if my concept is strong, I'll ask myself, lack of energy must be lack of respiration. So then I start to ask myself, what is required for respiration to happen? I need oxygen and I need digested food. So is it the lack of digested food or is it the lack of oxygen in this case? Clearly it is the lack of oxygen. Why? Because no air can leave or enter. And then since no air can leave or enter, the many people here would have depleted the amount of oxygen, whatever oxygen is in the air, causing my respiration rate to drop, and therefore people have a lack of energy and they will collapse due to that, right? So now let's translate that into our answer. So first point, okay, oxygen levels or amount will decrease in the lift as the people will take in oxygen for respiration. Okay? So you must explain why is oxygen being used up. Then next, you say soon there will be not enough. Now be very careful. A lot of you tell me no oxygen. How sure are you? Even 0.0000001% of oxygen is still oxygen. So soon there will be not enough oxygen for the people to carry out respiration. Hence, they will faint due to the lack of energy So this lack of energy is because they can not enough oxygen to carry out respiration. So because respiration is the one that releases energy from your digested food. Alright, so it has to be phrased in a very clear and systematic manner. But you see, the main crux of it is always talking about respiration, energy, and oxygen. So you have to understand this when you apply your knowledge. I've still not seen that in your work. Okay? Always remember this. Respiration requires two things: oxygen and digested food. Any of these two things does not reach the cells, respiration cannot happen. Alright? Okay, I'm pausing here for you to Alright, moving on. Next question. Now this question, most of you have managed to catch some important point, but you also left out a very important point. I'm gonna explain to you. So, Haziq prepared two setups as shown below and left them near a window, okay, during the day. Okay, after a few hours, Haziq observed that the lime water in both setup turned chalky, but the lime water in setup A was more chalky compared to B. Okay, and note, carbon dioxide turns lime water chalky. Okay, now, so whenever we have an experiment, we always ask ourselves this, right? The two questions. What is the change variable and what is the measured variable? So the change variable would be your presence of your plants, correct? Present and absence of your plant. This is your change variable. So you ask yourself, with a plant, what can a plant do that the other one could not? And that would be to photosynthesize, right? Where's the hint? Near a window during the day. That's the whole point. And it's a glass container. So this glass container means that you would be able to essentially allow light to enter. Okay, and your plant is able to carry out photosynthesis. Okay, so what is your measured variable? Your measured variable would be the chalkiness of your lime water. So we know that from the passage, they say A was more chalky. So because it is more chalky, we know that there is a higher amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, as compared to your setup B. Now I'm using a smaller arrow to denote that this is actually lesser. Okay? So let's talk about it. Then they asked you, explain the difference in the color change of lime water in both setups. So the first thing we need to recognize would be that in both setups, the lime water changed color. Right? They say change in color. So if let's just say both change color, I have to address the fact that they both change color. And since there is carbon dioxide, I must ask myself, where did this carbon dioxide come from? So the main idea is they both came from respiration of the living organisms, right? So you have a mouse. So both mice actually respired and they both release carbon dioxide. So why is it that in this setup, even though there's only one mouse for both, okay, the carbon dioxide levels is lower in setup B? Then you ask yourself, what's the change variable? The change variable would actually be the presence of your plant. So your plant carries out photosynthesis. Now, from knowledge, you know that photosynthesis, in order to carry out photosynthesis, your plant would need to take in your carbon dioxide. So as it takes in carbon dioxide, this would reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the surrounding air, and therefore causing your lime water to be not as chalky as the lime water in your setup A. Because in setup A, your plant is not there to take in your carbon dioxide to reduce the amount. So you need to be able to articulate these key points very clearly in your answer. So I'm going to demonstrate for you right now. So the first point, like I say, both mice in set up A and B gives off carbon dioxide during respiration. Right, so this would turn both lime water chalky in both experiments. However, okay, there is more carbon dioxide in setup A as most of the carbon dioxide. Okay, I wouldn't say most. Change this please as some. You don't know how much. Some of the carbon dioxide released in B is taken up by the plant for photosynthesis. So many students tend to forget to write down the key idea of photosynthesis. Okay, you need to tell me why. Okay, so what are the marking points? Both mice releases carbon dioxide during respiration. More compare. This is the comparison part, and explain why.